Okay, hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'm going to walk you through all the steps you need to be able to add authentication to your extension using Firebase, but also how to add a way you can receive payments through Stripe. So we're going to connect Stripe using a Lambda function on the back end, so we can actually process all of our payments as well. So what we're going to actually be building is something that will look similar to this. So as you see over here, I have this Auth Stripe Lambda function or extension just here. So if I click onto it up here, it's built into a Popout. And what you'll basically see is two areas. So we have login over here and create account over here. So this card information uses Stripe's JavaScript library to add in Stripe elements. And then when we sign up over here, it will make a call to our background service worker that will add the account in Firebase and then send off a API request to a Lambda function, which will process the payment, send back a response, and then add that to that user. So if I was to give a quick example over here, so I'll create an account like this, and then use the Stripe test card, which is just 42, like that. And if I click sign up, this will just process on the back end, make a call to our Lambda function, and then return with our information. So here you can see here, we have our user details and our Stripe ID. And if I check in my Stripe dashboard, I should see that this has actually been processed. Now, one thing I'd mention as well, you saw that sort of loading delay just there. When you actually add this to your extension, I'd recommend adding some sort of loading screen and error checking as well when they actually add their inputs. But anyway, just to show you here, so if I go to customers and refresh, so as you can see now, here's my account I just created. So it's this test email address. You can see the description there is our Firebase user ID. So if I check my Firebase database as well, so you can see here we have this test account and there's the user ID. And if we check that user ID, it should link up, with the ID we have over here. So basically what that does is it calls a Lambda function which processes that in the background. But I'll show you now how this code works and how you can set this up. First, we're going to look at the code for the extension. So that will start with our manifest file. Now this is all for manifest version 3, so it's completely up to date and you can use this moving forward and into the future rather than manifest version 2. And there's a few changes with things there. So as you can see here, we have a basic manifest file. The main changes between this and version 2 is that our background page is now a service worker. So that's called Firebase.js. And this is all run through a Popout, which is now in version 3 been changed to this action rather than browser action or page action. It's just called action, and that goes to popout.html. And then we have to use web accessible resources just here. Now the setup for this has changed a little bit as well. So we have these arrays, and you have to make sure that even if you're not using these, that you have them in there and empty, otherwise it will error with the manifest. So this just means we can access Stripe and Stripe Frame, but I'll explain that a little bit later. So first, what we want to have a look at is our popout.html to see how we actually set this up. So I'll open that up now. So it's a basic HTML page. So we have just some styling up here. Then we have just some setup info here, which explains what the extension does. I'll share all the code for this in the description. And we have a logged out area just here. So that is everything for this bit just here. So that's where people can create their accounts or log in. And then underneath that, we just have a little area which shows the logged in users details and lets them log out. So if I show you again the Popout over here, obviously because we just created an account, we're still logged in, and you can see the information for that user just here. So we have the Stripe ID, the user object, and the user ID. So that's pulling that from Firebase and from our database, and that saves that information there from Stripe as well. So if we go back into our page, we can see we then call app.js. Now, app.js is essentially almost like a content script, but for this Popout. So depending on the type of way that your extension is set up, you could use this in a number of different ways. So if we look at app.js now, this is broken into a number of different sections. So first, we just have a page display function, which whenever the user logs in, logs out, or signs up, we call this function to update the data. So should we show the logged in section, the logged out section, and then we update the logged in area with the user's details from the database. So that's fairly straightforward. And then down here, if you've worked with Chrome extensions before, you'll know that we use this Chrome runtime send message event that lets us communicate between the different parts of our Chrome extension. So this is no different. So down here, if the user, when the Popout is first opens, we check the authorization status of our user. So are they logged in or they logged out? And then we send that straight through to page display, which we looked at a minute ago up here. We also have listen events, but I'll explain those in a moment. And then down here, we have some click events. So there's 3 buttons that we have. There's a log out button, and then our log in and create account button. So we just attach a click event for each of these. So we have our log out just here, which again sends a message to our background service worker, which we'll look at in a moment. And that's for auth log out. And then we have one for sign up and for login. So login's quite straightforward. All that has to do is just grab the email, grab the password, and then send that to our background service worker. So you can see just here we set a command and then pass through E and P just here. And then all we really do after that is wait for a response and then send that through to our page display function, where you can then update that to have your different logged in sort of logic for your main part of your extension, depending on if it's a content script, a new page, new tab, or a pop-out extension like this. And then for sign up, it's a little bit different. So what we do is we grab the email and password the same way just here, but we also then set this into the global scope for, in this example, for this pop-out. And then what we actually do here is we send a command to our Stripe frame. So if we look at our popout.html over here, you can see for our create account section of the page over here, we have an iframe, which is for our Stripe frame. So as you saw in our manifest, we have this in our web accessible resources, so we can actually use this in our extension. So what this does in Stripe frame, I'll just open this up now and show you. But first you can just see here, we send a command called Stripe, submit Stripe card. So in our Stripe frame, we have essentially another HTML page just here. The first thing it does, this is quite important here, is we import Stripe JS. So this is for Stripe elements. Now, if you look on the docs, it actually says that you have to call this from within stripe.com/JS, something like that. But I've spoken to the support at Stripe around this, because with Manifest version 3, you have to make sure that any remote code you download and use locally within your extension. Now, Stripe have said this is fine and this should work within your extension. But if you've got any questions, send a message to Stripe support, because they are really helpful with this, and they usually get back within usually the same day. Otherwise, it's just a day or two. But that's if you want to double check. But from what they said to me, this is fine to use locally within your extension. So all you'll do is just save that file, and all I've done is just put it into a folder here and called it Stripe.js, then importing it exactly the same way. All we have after that is just some CSS styling, just to adjust the way that the element appears. And then down here, we set a card element part just here, very similar to what you would see in the Stripe docs. And then all that does is include the Stripe frame.js. So that is the actual file that will listen for this event just here. So let's take a look at that file now. Okay, so what you can see up here is we have a global variable up here, window variable, that just checks if we're in sandbox mode. So is it test keys we're using or live keys, which is quite important. So we set in our test key just here, and then we set our live key. So you can get these from the Stripe dashboard. So once you've created an account, you can go to developers and then API keys. Make sure you toggle the test mode first, so you're testing with actual test sandbox mode rather than live mode. Just make sure you double check that. And then what you want to get for your extension is grab the publishable key just here, so it looks something like this. So you just click that, copy it, and then paste that in up here. And then you can get the live key as well. So it'd still be the publishable key, but you'll just toggle it to the live mode, and that's what will go in there. The secret key is what we would use on Lambda, so our backend, so we can actually process this where the user can't see it, it's not client facing, so that can be fine to run in the background. And you want to make sure that you use the same types of keys together. So it's the test publish key and the test secret key and the live publish key and the live secret key. Just make sure you keep them together. So again, for our extension, you want the publishable key. So you'd paste that in just here, whether it's test or live. And then this is true. If this is sandbox mode is true, that means we're using our test keys. And if it's false, it means we're using our live keys. That just is what this part does just here. And then we initialize Stripe just here by using the key and set up Stripe elements. So then what Stripe elements does is it has a default styling that you can adjust just here. And then all we want to do is create an instance of the card. So we want to create a card token essentially after all of this. So then down here, all we're doing is connecting this to our page. So we're saying create an element just here. And then down here, we're mounting this to our element. So you can see we have set up Stripe. And at the bottom here, we actually set this all up. And then all we do is create our event listener for submit Stripe card, which is what we mentioned back over here. So when that's called, when we want to sign up a new user, we basically want to say to Stripe to take the input that the user has made, into our extension, as we saw at the start, and we want to convert that into a token that we can use. So when this command is run, we're going to call this example submit Stripe function, which is this one just here. So the first part of this code basically attaches this to our page. We can see, we grab the card element, which is this div just here. And then we take that and we convert it into a Stripe element, where the user can actually enter their card details. And then if you wanted to add any validation, onto your forms, this message here would send a request to in this case, our Popout.html. So you can be listening for those events as well. But that's next. Don't worry about that at the moment. So that would fire every time the actual user types in their card information and then tell you if it's valid or not. So that's this part here. But the next part is what happens when the user actually presses the sign up button and we grab this information just here. So we'd send this event just here to the page, and that calls this function. So inside this function, what we try and do is create a token with this card information. Now if this is an error, if it isn't valid, it will send this message just here. So either it would be this type of error or a general error with our card. And if we look back in our App.js up here, this is where these commands will be sent. So you can see we're listening for Stripe card on confirm and Stripe card on confirm error. So it's going to be one of these two things. So if we look back at our Stripe frame JavaScript, you can see that if this works, what we're really looking for here is this, and when we pass in our result token. So you can see just here, what we wait for is this callback and pass in the result. And if it's an error, we obviously pass through the error, but if it's not, it means we've got our token and we can actually move to the next stage here. So with this, we go back to our app.js and we now know that we have our token. So what we can do is, because down here for our sign up, we set these details to our window object, we can use these over here. So we then send a command similar to login and log out, but we call it auth sign up, and we pass through the email, the password, and the token ID. So that's what we can use in the next stage of our Lambda function. So before we look at our Lambda function though, let's take a look at our background service worker, because there's a few things in there that we need to actually take a look at. Okay, so here is our background service worker. So as you can see at the top here, we import all of our scripts. So with the change to service workers, you can't actually use require or any ES6 ways you can actually import modules. So you have to use this import scripts that's built into the service worker logic. And with that, we can call our files just here. So in Firebase, I downloaded these from the Firebase SDK. So these URLs will be something like gstatic.com / and then Firebase app, Firebase auth, Firebase database, for example. These are the ones that we're using here. Then we just import them, and then you add in your Firebase config. So you can get this from your Firebase console, and then get it from the project settings. Then you can paste that in just here. Then we just initialize Firebase, set a link to our database, and then we first check to see if the user's logged in or not. This is once they've actually created an account, when they're opening the Popout or the extension in the future. We just check to see what their status is basically. And then down here, we have our event listeners or our message listeners for the different types of events that we saw that we send from app.js. So there's user auth, user logout, or auth logout, auth login, and auth sign up. So they're all fairly straightforward. So for logout, we're just using Firebase auth sign out. For login, we're saying Firebase auth sign in with email and password. Then we send through the email address and the password that we sent through from our app.js, where we're adding those event listeners. So that's all quite straightforward, but the main one I want to show you here is the sign up. This is where we actually need to grab the token and send this to Lambda, and I'll explain how the Lambda function works as well. So you can see just here, when we're going to sign up, so I'll just highlight all of this code. So it's everything inside here. So what we're basically doing is first signing the user out. So if they've created an account already and they're creating another account, it's a very rare chance, but you want to make sure that they're actually signed out, and then we remove this from our session. And then all we do is we create a user with email and password. So we grab the E and the P again, so exactly the same as for login, but we're actually creating an account this time. And then here we're just catching any errors, and we send that back to our app.js. But otherwise, we know that the auth state will have changed. So the user's been created and they're now logged in. So Firebase does that for us. And then what we want to do next is send a request to our Lambda function. Now what Lambda does is when you create a function, which I'll show you in a moment, it generates a URL for you using API Gateway. So this is the URL it's generated for me, and the name of my function is this part just here. And then all we're doing is passing in information into the query params of the URL. So we're sending in Firebase user ID, the person's email address, and then the actual token that Stripe has generated for us. So that's why we have to have that Stripe frame JavaScript file just there. So then we also update the local storage. And then what we do just here is we use fetch to send this request to Lambda, and then we wait for a response. So what it will do just here is, in this example, I've just made it send back our Stripe ID, but what you'd want to do really in the future is add more error handling and then send different responses based on that. So then you could convert it to JSON, for example, and then read this and do different things. But all we do just here is we know that this response is our Stripe ID. So what we do is we just add that into the database just here for our user ID. So if I was to go into the database now and look at the account I just created, you can see there's my customer ID. And if I was to look in here, this customer ID would match up. So I don't know if you can see it right at the bottom there, but that matches up with the one that I have in the database just here. So once we know that that's been set into the database, we then grab this information from the database just here for this user, and then that's what we send back when an account has been created. So as you can see over here in app.js, for auth sign up, we then send that to page display. So exactly the same if you're logging in or when we're actually checking the status of a user just there. So that's all we do just there. And then we just have various types of error checking just here. So if there's an error when we're fetching information, if there's an error with the actual call to our Lambda function, and then if there's just a general error that we're catching because we put all of this inside a try block just here. So now that we've gone through all of this, as again, I've put all of the code for this in the description. You just need to make sure you change your API keys for Stripe and for Firebase. So now we need to look at our Lambda function. So there's a few things in here that you need to look at quite carefully. So again, that's all of our Firebase.js. So I'll just close these files here. Okay, so this is our Lambda function here. So this is the index.js, which is the main JavaScript file for our Lambda function. Now you can create this in a number of ways. What you need to make sure is that you actually have a node modules folder just here. So if you want, you can download this code from the link in the description and use it that way. But if you want, you can actually generate this for yourself as well. So all you would need to do is create a new folder on your computer, create a terminal window around this, and then run npm init, which will basically build a node modules folder for you like this into this folder. To add the Stripe JavaScript library or Node.js library, you'll just say npm install Stripe and then -- save to make sure that you have this included. So if I open up node modules just here, you'll see that this is all the stuff that Stripe needs to run its library. So once that's there, you can then create a JavaScript file just here called index.js, and then that's everything that you need. So then in the actual code down here to the main part of the actual function, we require Stripe, so that grabs that from node modules, so we can use that in here. And then you just set up Stripe here and pass in your secret key. So again, as we mentioned in our API keys, you just click reveal test key and then that would work. My light's getting quite dark here. So that will get your secret key. And again, remember, if you're using the live keys, make sure that they match depending on what you're using. So that's the key you would paste in just there, the secret key. And then down here, we just have a really simple function that first grabs the information from our query params. So when we pass that in, and we set this as empty first. So if nothing's passed through, we can just handle this nicely. So as you see, if there's no information, we just send back missing params. But if it is there, what we do is we create a customer. So that creates a customer ID for us, which is what we actually pass back to our Chrome extension. Once we've got a customer ID, we then attach a price. So in the Stripe dashboard, you can create products. Each product can have a plan, and then those plans have their own individual price ID. So this means you can have a one-time payment or a recurring payment, depending on the way that you want to set up your extension. So then all you do is grab the price ID here from your Stripe dashboard, which is really easy to find. So you paste that in just there. Now, one thing to mention, depending on the version of the Stripe API that you're using, this can differ slightly, but this is the most up-to-date version that you can use. So it should be basically similar to this. So once you've got that, that means that your Stripe user has had an account created just here. So from Firebase, or from our extension, we generate a Firebase user ID, which we grab. So we have our user ID just here, our email address, and our token. So that's what the Stripe JavaScript side makes on our extension. And because we know that we have all of these things, we can create a customer that has this email address. We pass in the user ID into the description just to give us context on who this user is, and then the source. So this is the payment method that will be for this user by default. So all we need to do there is pass in the token, and that will use that Firebase. That will use the card details that the user entered on our Chrome extension. And that's what will be created from this. So we have this Stripe customer ID, which we then pass in just here. So we have customer, then we have the customer Stripe ID, and then all you need to do there is that's where you pass in your price. So your price ID there. And there could be multiple things in here as well, but it's easy just to pass in one to begin with. And that will then automatically take payment straight away. So as soon as that's done, we just return our customer Stripe ID, so that means that in our extension, if we look over here, so our Firebase, that's what will be returned just here. So we have our response text or our response JSON. So if you were to send this back as a JSON string, we could then use response JSON, and then this will be an object that we could use just here, to check which type of response you want to send back. So once you've got your node modules folder and your index.js created, you'll then turn that into a zip file and turn that into a Lambda function. So I'll walk you through now on how to actually do that. So as you can see here, I have my function over here. This is my index.js and my node modules. So all I want to do is just select them and compress. So that turns it into a zip file. So then all we're going to do now is go over to Lambda. So as you can see, here's my function that I was using already, but I'll show you how to create a new one from scratch as well. So we're going to click create function. We're going to give it a name. So we'll just say Chrome extension backend Stripe, just so we can send this somewhere. And then you don't need to change anything else. Just click create function. And that'll just run in the background. It shouldn't take too long. Okay, so once that's created, you'll get a page that looks a little bit like this. And then where it says code, function code just here, you can use the inline editor. But the reason that I started by showing you this within Atom in a code editor is that you can't actually add in node modules and external SDKs from here. So the easiest thing to do is click actions over here and upload a zip file. Now, if the file that you've created is really large, like over 10 megabytes, and you can upload it via S3, but for my example, I can just use the zip file just here. So I just click upload and then find the one I created. So just here, click open and then save. And that will then upload and get that ready for me to use. And then put the code in there. So you should see that should still match up with your secret key, but I'll blur mine out for now. Okay, and then you're almost done. So what we need to do first is add a trigger. So at the moment, this function can't be called when it's typing in a URL. So what we need to do first is add a trigger. So we click this just here, and then we want to select API Gateway, just here. And then we want to create an API, a plain HTTP API. So on security, just say open. So just make sure you can add more security just here, but I'm not going to go into that in this video. It's already long enough. So we've got all of that just here, and then just click add. And then what that will do is it will run in the background, and then that is now connected to our function. So if you click this details down here, it will give you the endpoint that you need. So if we click this, it will say missing params. There we go. So that means this is all working. So if you were to copy this and now add this into our app.js or our firebase.js, and you see where we have our URL just here, we'll then just replace that with the one that's just been generated. So like that, and that will now call this new Lambda function that we've just created. So okay, that is how you can do it from start to finish. As I mentioned, all the code for this is in the description. Just make sure that you update your API keys and create your own Lambda function. But if you have any questions on this, because I know there's a lot involved, just drop a comment below or send me an email, and I'll do my best to help you get this sorted as well. So thanks for watching. I hope you found this useful, and you can subscribe for more content like this on the channel as well. Okay, bye. Thanks for watching.